And today we're joined by our guest, Kristine Sizemore, who is an expert in sales training and sales development. Kristine is the president of KSA, which is a Sandler Training Partner, located here in Birmingham, Alabama, in my hometown. And Kristine and I have known each other for a while, and she's always one of my favorite guests to have in our events because she just always shares such a wealth of knowledge. So today we're going to go over the topic of how to handle sales training in the new normal. And so we're going to talk about a variety of points. We're going to keep this very conversational today. We're not going to use any PowerPoints or any slides. This is simply going to be an open discussion and a fireside chat between Kristine, myself, and Paul Tkach, who is joining as our fellow panelist. And we're going to talk about a number of different points. We're going to start out just by talking about how the environment has changed in general and why things are moving more remotely, hybrid selling in general. What is hybrid selling? How do you handle that? But then what are the impacts of that remote engagement from a sales management and training perspective? So how do you continue to nurture and give your teams what they need? How do you guide them in this new world? We'll dive into all those topics. And I'm sure conversation will take us on some tangents. We welcome questions from the audience. So there's a couple of different ways you can do that. You can simply hit the raise hand button and ask your question that way if you'd like us to address it live. You can also use the chat feature. So Paul is going to be monitoring all of our chat that comes in. So if you can simply text us a message, you can do that privately or in public. And we will either answer your question back live or we will respond to it in text. So anyway, without any further hang up, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Kristine to do a quick introduction of herself, and then we're going to hop right into the topic.
Hi, thanks, Dave. Kristine Sizemore with Sandler Training. I own a Sandler office here in Birmingham, Alabama, and work with business owners, sales leaders. Typically they're at the top of their industry. But they're serious about revenue growth. They've invested in many different ways to drive revenue. But when it comes to their sales team, they want to see them working with qualified prospects, making sure that those company resources, time, and effort are spent where it's really going to pay off with a mutually beneficial revenue generating relationship. Others are frustrated because sometimes they're seeing their team cut price to win or looking to adjust terms and conditions, and they don't need to. And others are sometimes frustrated because they're bringing on salespeople, and after 6 months or after a year, it's not working out and it's expensive. It takes a hit on morale. So typically, when I work with sales leadership, when I work with business owners, they reach out around those areas, and we get to work.
Well, that's great. Well, Kristine, what we'll do, we'll just go ahead and hop right into the topic. And, if any of you had joined us for sort of the pre-webinar chat here, you may have heard us talking a little bit about the changes in the environment and things that are going on. So the first question I'd start out with, Kristine, is just how has the environment changed overall? And what has that really meant to adapting your sales training to this new normal?
Yes. When you say new normal, here's what I picture. Think of your life the first week of March in 2020. Where were you? What were you doing? I was at a conference in Orlando. And I was coming back to, a week full of discovery meetings, booked full. And then that depends on where you are when that actual shutdown occurred, right there in March. But very abruptly, we were all moved to this world. So what changed? For me, I had been working with everyone in person. All of my training was in person. And almost overnight, everything went to virtual. So now here we are, a year and a half or so later. And at least in my world, everything changed very quickly. I had to learn to bring value virtually. So not only did that change, how I was interacting with my clients, how I was interacting with my prospects, but the whole setup changed. So when you look at the framework, and the framework we use at Sandler is attitude, behavior, and technique. When you look at all three of those, change had to happen in all three to really thrive in the midst of constant change. And really, one of the first things you have to look at is from that attitude and mindset standpoint, when those rolling changes keep coming, do you look at it as, okay, we're going to figure out how to make this work and what the advantages are? Or do you think about the things you've lost? We've got to choose the mindset that's going to serve us well. And that's what leads to success.
Yeah. And that is a huge challenge too. I think that so many people, first of all, what a, catastrophic event and continuation of events, right?
Yes.
Now rolling on, year two. But I think that was a huge impact, was just people thinking, well, how do we react differently? And those that really made that early pivot were the ones who did embrace it and the ones who really just started trying things. And, that's something we talk about on our podcast and our webinars all the time is, one is always greater than zero. That's Paul says this all the time. So I'll still his quote, but it's true. You have to make a step somewhere. And so when we saw that happening, even in our organization, which we've been virtual for the most part in all of our selling, but we're doing, visits out to our prospects and getting out on the field, and all of that uprooted. So, the way that we were trying to engage people was different. Hosting virtual events like this has been a big deal for us. But, when it came to management, one thing we realized really quickly was that we had to rely on data, we had to rely on systems, we had to rely on processes. So how have you seen, other firms embrace that, and how is Sandler really advocating to wrap some management around that very new non-traditional model?
Yes, that's a great question. Well, first of all, think about the difference between, if we look at a stark contrast between all face-to-face versus all virtual, what new tools do you have at your disposal in a virtual world? And we're on the screen here. You can record more easily. You can bring in additional people to the conversation, and logistically, it's simpler. So from the standpoint of bringing on, onboarding, training and coaching salespeople to success, how can management use those tools to do all of that more effectively? Now, we also have to ask the question of what doesn't change. What doesn't change are the fundamentals of your conversational sales process. If you're a sales leader, and you're bringing on a sales representative, or you're coaching your existing team, you want to know, how are they starting those prospecting conversations? What is their, prospect-focused 30-second commercial? What does it sound like? How do they adapt to the person they're talking to? Is it something they have practiced and that they have down cold, so that when they're starting their conversations, they know exactly where they're going to start as far as drawing out their prospects and what matters to them? So if you're able to record those conversations, if you're able to work with your team on self-guided coaching discovery conversations on how that's going, what does that mean for you as a manager? And then how do you build that into your management behavioral plan?
It's interesting you talk about using the same tools we already have available at our disposal. And if you didn't join early in the pre-show, it was funny. Kristine actually had her Zoom bot that joined the webinar with us. That was it records sales conversations so that you can review them and figure out how you can be better, right? And you can coach salespeople with it. Paul, I know you use those as well, and you frequently have reviewed those, yourself and also with your team. Paul, how have you sort of used some of those new tools, and really the same tools, I guess, that you're using to sell, but then also to turn that around and use that as a way to help coach your team and better direct them?
Yeah, I think Kristine hit the nail on the head there. I think that when we came into this transition into this virtual world, there was a lot of stuff that changed, right? I think that we look at two sides of the coin. I think that we had a lot more at our fingertips and our disposal of what we could do, and the recordings is one. And I think that there's the other side of the coin there, which is the emotional and the interpersonal aspect of sales, which you kind of miss in the video, but we'll talk a little bit about that later. I think when it comes to the recordings, they're extremely impactful for our team. I'm not taking notes anymore. I'm not trying to remember important details. I can now have a conversation and be fully dedicated to that conversation or that prospect or that customer and not have to worry about taking notes. And when I get back to my desk later, I can then look at my recordings and see if there's anything I missed or if there's anything I need to highlight or place an emphasis on. For our teams in training, it's phenomenal. When I finish a demo, if I finish a great conversation, I'm able to share that recording with my reps and the rest of my team. I'm able to highlight areas that we thought we did well in, areas that we might need improvement in. So it's a real game changer in terms of collecting that data and being able to use it for my own personal reminders to really accelerate that deal or accelerate that conversation or that opportunity, but also to really emphasize the training and good practices and habits with my team by sharing that recording. So really, really impactful on how that's a game changer for us.
Right. And Kristine, what about you and your organization and Sandler? Are they have any best practices or things that they're sharing around how to take those tools and use them with your team?
Well, building on what Paul just shared, an effective debrief is incredibly powerful in learning and changing behavior. Now, one thing we have to remember is that we have to be open to fail to win. You know, I got some very good advice from a mentor who told me, he said, Kristine, get out there, fail fast and fail often to win.
Yep. Fail fast.
Now, I'm a very analytical person who likes to do things right. The first time I heard that, I didn't like it, but I've had to embrace it because that's how we get better. And what Paul just described is in that debrief process, you know, there's a couple of frameworks that we share. You know, one simple framework is from a coaching perspective is to ask your team member, your direct report, you know, what did you do well? What could you do better? And what would you do different? Because, you know, you always want to start with what went well, you know, to get the conversation started on a positive note. And then guide them through that conversation. Because one thing we focus on a lot when in my Sandler Management Solutions class, where I'm working with sales leaders and business owners, is every month we do some role play around coaching conversations and how you avoid that tail mode. Because what happens if we're in tail mode?
Well, that is the worst place to be as a salesperson because it becomes a one-sided conversation.
Exactly. And same things when we're in management. So I loved hearing Paul describe that debrief process. And there's so much power in being able to provide either, you know, a recording or a transcript for a salesperson to evaluate themselves. Because sales leaders can coach their own people, but they can also teach them how to coach themselves. And that's where you can really leverage accelerated learning. And if you have an entire team where you can share those, you know, that slight edge learning, it can benefit the entire group.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I'm a sports guy, so I relate this to sports, right? When you're golfing in your golf game, people take recordings of their swing to see how they're actually performing, right? And I think that this is pretty much the exact same example for sales now. We have a way to capture our conversations, actually analyze how we're performing, and then correct it going forward. So I think that it is extremely impactful. And for onboarding as well, I mean, I think that's another big topic too. We're some new hires. I mean, we have people who come into our organization, they haven't sold before, right? So they haven't gotten into conversations. The ability just to see what a real life conversation looks like and how it goes and how one question leads to another and then goes to another follow-up question, that is extremely important and impactful too, because you don't know what it's like to get into those sales conversations, or you don't know what they're like until you're actually in them. And to be able to provide that kind of analysis and debrief for your new hires and new reps is extremely important.
Yeah. And the tools, go ahead, Kristine. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, if you put on the hat of that new rep, you know, whatever position they're in, whether it's a BDR or account executive, you know, they're new at your organization. You know, they want to be successful. They're excited to be there. But if they don't have a vision, a concrete vision of where they can go in this position and how they can execute that, what does that impact have on them as far as ramping up to success, financial success, as quickly as they can? Because when they have a roadmap that they can see, hear, and experience, and if they know that there's a plan where they're going to be able to learn skills, test those skills, you know, be checked and get feedback, and in a developmental process that is a living process, not just a document that someone prints out and hands to them in a binder. what does that mean for long-term success and for retention of that sales talent that is hard to come by these days, and that management wants to develop quickly for success? Because without that talent on that team, you simply can't scale and grow.
Yeah, and the retention, Kristine, is a significant problem. And Paul and I were actually on another webinar recently about industrial manufacturing in general and how it's changed since COVID. One of the biggest topics we got into on that webinar was just simply one of the big challenges is talent acquisition and retention right now, because it's so hard to find really good salespeople, and then once you do, it's so hard to keep them because the salaries are getting higher, people are getting into bid wars for good talent. And so I could not agree more. Anything you can do to lay that groundwork for retention is great. And, just kind of circling this back, because we always try to think about, the big concepts, but then what can you roll that down into tactical tools? We've talked about Zoom. So just you can't, not only can you use it for sales calls, for webinars like we're doing right now, but with recording bots, you can use it for review. Vidyard and Kristine, I know you sent me a Vidyard even before this meeting. We have personally used Vidyard extensively in our sales process, but then also in training, right? And Paul, maybe you could give some best practice examples of how you've even taken Vidyard and use that with your team, where you're sharing examples of best practices, sales conversations, et cetera, and it becomes a tool both ways, right?
Yeah, Vidyard has been a game changer for us. I mean, one of the big things that we missed when we got into this virtual environment last year was the interpersonal and emotional aspect of sales, right? So I feel like I miss out on the handshakes and the eye to eye and being able to see people and how they react when I'm in a room with them. So I do miss that. But what has been a good medium to use and strategy has been video. And so not only connecting with prospects, am I able to convey my emotions and that interpersonal connection, but with my team as well, I'm actually able to now take quick snippets of videos or examples of what they should do on outreach to give them an idea of what they should be doing. So for example, a couple of weeks ago, we were putting together 60-second videos for prospects. And all it took me was 30 seconds to put together a quick video of what it should be like for my team, how you should be creating your videos. And within a couple of seconds and minutes, my team had an example of what they should be following and what they should be doing. So we've been using it for prospecting, sending videos to customers and prospects, but we've been also using it for training purposes. I'll take a quick recording, send it over to my team. Hey guys, this is a great example of what we should be doing and a good framework. So a couple of different areas, but it has been a game changer, video in general in sales.
And Kristine, what are your thoughts, or what have you seen with your clients around how different that skill set is? And the reason I ask, I'll dig a little bit deeper. It's a little bit easier, I guess, sometimes for a software company like us to embrace those kinds of things, or have video or use Vidyard. You think about B2B, it's different, right? You've got a lot of individuals that are very much used to seeing people face to face, being in the field, having relationships, going on events, right? Fishing, golf, whatever. So that skill set is so different from that type of individual to someone that's going to get behind a web camera and start creating those sort of videos. So how have you seen that play out with your clients? Are there any insights you've got around how to train people on how to adapt those skills?
Yes. Well, this, Paul mentioned, those recorded videos to start the conversation. And this Wednesday in my Sandler Foundations class, we were specifically working on prospect-focused 30-second commercials. And, my client base, one or two of them work virtually like you, but the rest of them, it's face-to-face, but now there's also a mix of virtual because that's simply part of the environment we're in. So one of the first things, just from a blocking and tackling standpoint technique, you've got to make sure you're comfortable on video. You've got to make sure you have an environment. I mean, if you think of the analogy, because I have some clients who are in the financial services industry, when they are going in to meet with a client, they're going to find out ahead of time, what's the dress code? Where are we going to be meeting? So that they are, appropriately ready for the meeting. The translation to the virtual world is, what is your setup? What is your lighting? What is your sound? Just covering those basics so you're comfortable. But then you move forward into actually executing the skill that you're learning. So, for example, Paul, when you have a team and they're able to record their videos, We use a 30-second commercial creator tool. And if anyone listening would like to get that, they're welcome to reach out to me and I'll send it over to you. And you practice your 30-second commercial. Are you covering in a prospect-focused way, sharing what you do? The pains, the compelling emotional reasons that people to do business with you, are you covering those in your initial conversation? Because what you're really doing is you're casting a net to see, does your prospect have problems that you can help them solve? And setting up that conversation that's focused on them, not on your features and benefits. Because people buy for their reasons, not ours. So from the standpoint, Paul, of, working with your team, not only can they evaluate their own recordings, but are they comfortable enough to share those recordings with each other and provide feedback as a team with guided discovery from you as their coach? And think about how the learning process can be accelerated when everyone works together.
Yeah, I think that's so important when it comes to collaboration. And we had that happen a couple of weeks ago where one of our ADRs had success on a video that they had used, and they posted that video in our channel on Slack and shared that with other people. And I couldn't agree more. I think that you're really able to not cut corners, but advance and accelerate your learning and amongst your team by sharing those videos, right? Like I said, it's something we didn't have before, that data, that recording, that understanding, and being able to share it so quickly. So I couldn't agree more with that.
Well, and think of the power well, first of all, the power of video, because we are all very visual people in how we learn. And when it comes to learning how to have a guided discovery conversation in your selling process, focused on your prospects, uncovering their problems and helping them discover that you're the best one to help them solve that problem. You're not learning scripts. Your people are learning how to watch, see, hear, and experience what they're receiving from the prospect so they can respond in the right way. And being willing to step out of your comfort zone and record yourself on video and learn from that can be a very powerful way to anchor the learning in your subconscious. Because you mentioned, the game of golf. I mean, how many people know the rules of the game of golf? How many people could pass a test on how the game is played, who the best players are?
Not me.
But even how many of those people that could do that can go out and perform at the top level? That gap between knowledge, and consistent, skilled professional execution is what we're talking about.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. And I think that one of the big things with the video too is this isn't like you going back to the point about templating. This isn't an ADR or SDR templating stuff and sending it over, or scripting stuff and sending it over. They're learning a skill. They're learning how to converse. They're learning how to take a message and put that in 30 seconds and really can convey their message clearly with their customer or their prospect. And that is a game changer alone, right? Learning that framework, learning that strategy, getting the skills to actually do that is important. And I think that video in general puts the human element back in the process, right? I think that the prospects and customers want to see your face. They don't want to see, they get hundreds of emails on a weekly basis that are templated and scripted and very easy for people to put together, right? It doesn't take any skill. But when you turn on that camera and you do talk for 20 seconds or 30 seconds or 40 seconds, and you resonate with your prospect or your customer, and you mention points that hit home for them, it is a big, big difference. So I think you're totally right when it comes to the skill set of learning how to do it versus just doing it and maybe copying it. Very important.
Yeah. And the art I see in between that too is, understanding the fundamentals, like you mentioned, Kristine, understanding sort of the rules of the game, right? Where the general areas lie, but then how to flex in between that. And that's something that, and I'd love to get your take on this, Kristine, but I feel like it's something that, is a bit of a nature and nurture balance. I think most people have a little bit of that in them innately, but I think that through practice and through techniques, you can pull more of that out. But understanding how not to just be a robot, how not to sit there and read a script if you're uncomfortable. And I will say this personally. I mean, when COVID happened and we moved to virtual, for even for us, I found myself struggling on that a little bit at the beginning as well. So, you want to be consistent. So you try to write things out or you try to script stuff and it comes out disingenuous, right? So there's always that art of balancing. How do I have a plan and know what my value prop is, and that, the elevator pitch you're talking about, but then between that, the art of conveying that the same as you would in conversation. And there's just that mental divide between how you would do that in a room where you would probably feel much more comfortable and natural versus how you do that on a screen where, yes, you can see someone, but it's a little bit different of a technique and how to approach it.
And David Sandler said, it's important that you're not attached to the outcome. Practice, prepare, be ready. But when you're in that conversation, be there 100%, and trust in what you've studied and what you've prepared for. Because Dave, you're exactly right. If you're moving forward in a robotic way, people can sense if there's not authenticity there, or if you're not comfortable as a professional having that conversation. And that's where practice, preparation, and being willing to just jump into something new, even though it's uncomfortable, is incredibly powerful to doing that. And when it comes to executing that from a management standpoint, you've got to ask the question, do your people have the techniques that they need? Whether that's the techniques to start a prospecting conversation, whether that's the technique to have an effective discovery call or performance gap call with your prospects and move that forward to doing business. Do they have those techniques? Have they practiced them? Have they executed them? Has there been a skill check process documented along the way, say in their first 90 days? And then on the other hand, you have to ask, could they have some conceptual barriers to having these conversations? Because when it comes to asking good questions, when it comes to working with executives, with business owners from a standpoint of equal business stature, could there be conceptual or mental barriers to executing what they know?
Yeah. The thing you mentioned there that resonated with me over and over was comfort and getting people to that point of being comfortable. And I think that one area that prevents people from doing more to embrace hybrid selling and digital selling is the comfort. They're not comfortable on camera. They're not comfortable on trying to embrace LinkedIn, which I want to talk about later, because I think that's a great for us to talk about how you train their social networks. But how to get comfortable with all those things. And just again, to hit on a couple of tactical things before we keep on the conversation, I want to go back to a point you mentioned earlier, Kristine, which was your environment. So how do you make sure you've got the tools you need? How do you make sure that you're comfortable? Almost that quote unquote dress code of digital selling. Having simple tools. And by the way, I have a nice microphone here that I've invested. Paul does as well, but you don't have to have those things. And that's one of the things that we talk about consistently with people that join our webinars and listen to our podcast is you can start anywhere. You can literally start with your cell phone. I had Drew Franklin on my podcast a few weeks ago, and we talked about video. And he literally was mentioning just the power of your iPhone and how powerful the cameras are, the front-facing camera and the audio capture. So even if you're just using something like your phone, you can still start somewhere. But getting comfortable with that, practicing a little bit, getting used to how it feels to see yourself on video, how it gets to hear yourself on video and playback. I know that's one thing. It's even for me, I listen to my podcast sometimes and I'm like, oh, I say that word too much, or, oh, I shouldn't do this, say this, so it's that whole process of getting yourself comfortable with how digital feels. And it's not the same as sitting down with someone in person. So, go ahead.
When you mentioned that, it makes me think, and Paul, I'd like to hear your feedback on this as a manager. When it comes to expectations, you guys have probably heard this. I mean, one thing we hear from salespeople all the time, I hear it too. I just don't have time to prospect. It's amazing how we can make excuses for those things that are uncomfortable.
Right. When
you link it to getting more comfortable on video, a lot of times you hear, oh, I don't have all the right equipment, or I can't spend a bunch of money on that. You know what? It doesn't take a lot. to, to have a base level of proficiency on looking good and sounding good on video. But if we want to, we can always come up with an excuse that we see as a barrier or see as a hurdle. But, if we're leading other people, we've got to ask ourselves, are we accepting mediocrity? Are we allowing these excuses to prevail? Maybe even because we're uncomfortable with it ourselves. And that can be a hard question to ask.
I think it's a really good point. Mm-hmm. Sorry, continue, Kristine. Looks like you were going to finish.
No, I'd like to hear what you think about that, because when, I've managed people before. I was promoted well before I should have been in my 20s. And was not
never ready.
Was not a good manager. Had no idea what I was doing. And so I would vacillate between command and control and then just really acquiescing to get people's approval so they wouldn't quit. That is not an effective way to manage. And I learned a lot in those years. So we have to ask ourselves, how do we hold our team accountable for what they really can do? How do we challenge them to be their best and equip them to be their best and coach them and believe in them to be their best versus accommodating their excuses that we know are holding them back? But honestly, they're also holding us back because we make those same excuses ourselves.
Yeah, I think it's such a good point. And I think that one, for video, I think it's a good example. I'll talk a little bit about that, but I think I saw that a lot with the phone. I think that in my personal experience, a lot of reps avoided using the phone and still do avoid using the phone because they're scared and they're uncomfortable. You don't know what that person's going to say on the other end of it. You don't know how they're going to respond. You don't know whether it's going to be a leave me alone, bug off, or if it's going to be a good conversation. And most cold calls do tend to have a negative connotation, right? Because people don't know they're getting caught off guard. But if you do it right and you do it well, it's effective, right? And we've seen adding calls to cadences makes it a lot more effective. And so when I think it comes to us, there's no excuse for our team and our team not to use video or use it in an effective way. There is no excuse. And we've placed a large emphasis on using video and using it correctly. And so when it comes down to our team using it, it's like your golf swing. I'll go back to this, or a hockey shot or a basketball shot. Your first one's not going to be good. You're taking a basketball shot from the free throw line. You might airball it, you might miss, you might hit the backboard and bounce. Your second shot's closer, your third shot's even closer, and your fourth shot might go in, right? So the same thing with our ADRs. When they started doing their videos, the first couple of videos weren't good. They were choppy. They were saying a lot of ums. They were whatever it might be, weren't conveying their information. But I go back to my point of 1 is greater than 0. And the more you keep producing, the better you get. And we'll review those videos, see what we can tweak, what questions we can ask. We've tried putting frameworks together in scripts, but it really just comes down to trying and practicing and understanding the points that you have to make and convey in that video and really delivering on that. And so with us, there's been no excuse for video and not using it. We've placed an emphasis on it. And while there was uncomfortability in the beginning, or a lack of comfortability, we have made it comfortable now by just doing and doing and doing. And it's now become the back of our hand. We know how to turn the camera on 30 seconds, 45 seconds and pitch. And our ADRs, Nick and Chase, have done a really good job of their videos and how far they've come from their first video to where they're at now. It's amazing. And I always pat them on the back and say that you guys if you guys ever feel bad or you tell me you can't do something, go watch the first video you guys took, sent it out to prospects, and then come watch one of your ones from last week. And you guys will see how much you guys have grown.
I love that. Because, we just want to compete with ourselves.
Yes.
Are we better than we were last month? Are we better than we were last year?
Exactly. And they love it too, right? I mean, it feels good when you're able to do something that you said you couldn't do, and you're now doing it really, really well. So, kudos to them. So that's what we've done. There's no excuse for it.
You bring up something interesting, because we have to be careful what we tell ourselves.
Yes, we do.
It comes back to that attitude and that mindset, because I work with a wide range of clients. Some are young, some are older, and some people think, I can't change. If we tell ourselves that, it will bear out. But if we tell ourselves we can, and if we take action to do it, that's what drives change. But that's what's uncomfortable. So we got to be very careful what we're telling ourselves in our mind, because we're listening.
So, Kristine, this is a fantastic moment to take a pivot and go kind of into what I wanted to go earlier around
Sure.
where are some places you can start and where are some easy channels? And when I think of easy channels, I think the most underrated, underutilized place to be is on LinkedIn. And
Yes.
one thing that and we talk with our teams about sharing and being consistent, and you don't have to have a corporate strategy around sharing on social to be effective.
Mm-hmm.
I know you do that very well, and I've seen the others in Sandler do that very, very well. How would you relate to, if someone, let's say, for instance, is a little uncomfortable with video or they're just beginning down that journey, would you say to them that social would be a good, safe place to start, even if it's with text post, right? Like, so you're not having to use video or audio or anything like that. So is that a good place to start? And have you seen any sort of coaching or training strategies around how to get your teams to use social media more effectively in this new environment?
Oh, that's a great question. Utilizing LinkedIn can be very powerful. I mean, the first thing you want to make sure is that your profile, because these days, if someone's reaching out to us, they're gonna look us up on Google first, right? And one of the first things that often pops up is your LinkedIn profile. So make sure that it's not just your resume. You want to make sure that it's focused on how you help your prospects. You want to make it about them. But when it comes to actually utilizing LinkedIn, the great thing is it's free. So there's no barrier there as far as an investment. And the focus is bring value. It takes consistency, but if you bring value to your target market on LinkedIn consistently, you will reap rewards. And remember, people want to do business with people they know, like, and trust. And when people get to see you on video, because I do have a video strategy for LinkedIn, and it can be very powerful to help you start that relationship. Because if people have seen your videos, they already start to feel like they know you. Now, it's uncomfortable to get started. You may feel, what are people going to think about me? But you have to shed that. You have to let that go, because you've got to remember, you help your ideal clients solve their problems, and your job is to find them. And what if you don't find them? They don't fix their problems. You can't thrive and help them. They can't thrive and grow because they're working with you. And particularly if you're selling to a market that is active on LinkedIn, you definitely want to take advantage of it, because you can build it into your behavioral plan. You can start just posting once a week, and if you can take it up from there if you choose to. But you learn so much in the process. Mm-hmm. And Dave, you're exactly right. Your iPhone or your Samsung phone is all you need to put up, some good quality videos. And if you need a tip to consider what to talk about, talk to your best clients about how you help them. Build your content around what they tell you.
That is a wonderful, wonderful takeaway. And I want to continue to drill into that, because, there's another person I follow. Actually, I had her on my podcast a few months back. Her name's MJ Peters. Yes. And she was formerly the VP of marketing at Firetrace, a B2B company. Now she's leading VP of growth strategy at Refine Labs, which is one of the biggest digital advertising firms for SaaS. But she talks a lot about like how to, do customer growth hacking and how you build your messaging around your customer problems. Like, go talk to
exactly right.
customers, and it literally take what they say, change a few words around, and use that in your marketing. And it's unbelievable how things begin to grow and expand, because you're literally hacking your messaging right from your best clients and the ones that you provide the best solution for. And, also on that topic for LinkedIn and how you're coaching your team around how to utilize LinkedIn.
Yes.
One challenge, and I see it so much in the B2B world, because we grew up in the world of make a flyer, that's how we promote anything. We're going to make a flyer, we're going to do whatever, and we're going to push. Right. LinkedIn is not a push channel. And I think so many people fall into this trap of, hey, I'm just going to reshare my company's post about new product XYZ, or I'm going to post, hey, make your facility more efficient today, buy my stuff. And no one wants to hear that, right? It's a conversational type platform. So I think, one of the things even we've done with our team is when you're writing a LinkedIn post, think about how to phrase that. Provide your own thought, provide your own context, ask a question, start a poll, do anything you can do to try to get engagement with your client versus just pushing a message at someone around, whatever you selfishly want them to hear. And I think that's difficult for a lot of people, especially difficult for a lot of legacy salespeople, simply because they are more in that sort of product selling, product first kind of focus. But, starting out with that LinkedIn strategy to me, yes, video is great, but even if you just start with text, start by posting a thought of the day. Maybe something came into your mind, like again, to your point, Kristine, while you were having a conversation with a customer. Hey, I've been noticing a lot lately that customers have been asking me about video strategy or whatever, fill in the blank, right? Here's my thoughts about how to get started. And then there you go. You got a great LinkedIn post and you created that organically rather than just, sharing your company's latest product feature,
Yeah. Well, do you mind if I kind of reframe what I think you're talking about here, Dave?
Absolutely.
When you think about two things, I know you guys have been in corporate jobs. I was too. And when I think about the training I was sent to, it was either, off for a week or 2 weeks, and 95% of it was product and service training. Now, that's important. What you do is important. But when it comes to engaging prospects, their problems are what matter. So we've also got to look at human nature, because our human nature is to focus on us, right? So how do we reframe that and focus on our prospect? The process of changing those habits takes intention, takes time, and takes practice, so that we aren't focusing on ourselves, on our features and benefits, and pushing what we do. We're inviting others to have a conversation to see if we can help them. And that's a significant change in the conversational approach of starting an engagement with a prospect. But it's a very powerful one because it's focused on them. And you know what? Many times prospects may not have a need to work with you or work with you right away. And that's why that consistent behavior in the prospecting process is so important, to find the people that have those compelling reasons to work with you now.
Yes, absolutely.
And also the skill set of helping your prospects. Oftentimes our prospects don't know what they don't know, right? They don't know the implications of doing nothing. They may not know even the implications of how they've designed their decision-making process or their bid process. So that skill of educating them through your conversational process is incredibly powerful in creating demand, in moving opportunities forward. And when it comes to video and when it comes to practice, it can be incredibly powerful to debrief as you move forward in fine-tuning and developing your conversational sales process.
Yeah. And I think one interesting change in dynamic on sales coaching and training in the new environment is how to get salespeople to realize that the outbound process, again, through digital, now looks and feels a lot more like sort of an inbound process in ways. And I say this as a marketer because I look at it through a different set of glasses. But, if you think about marketing and you think about your funnel, right? You got awareness, consideration, you've got decision-making time, and then you've got purchase. Well, all the data now suggests that, post-COVID, the buyer journey has gotten even longer in terms of what they do up front on their own self-discovery. So it was around like 70%. Now people are arguing that it's like 80% of the buying journey is done before someone ever talks to you or talks to your sales team. So if you're an outbound person, or if you're a sales rep and you're doing outbound, with that in mind, now you have to consider that the people you're really trying to attract are going to spend 80% of their time researching before they ever talk to you. So creating your own content as a salesperson, almost taking your own reins of creating marketing sort of awareness, right? And building content that is going to educate and get those conversations started with the type of prospects that you want to engage, so that when you do reach out to someone and they go to your LinkedIn profile and they see what you're talking about, they go, oh, hey, I get it. Kristine is talking about the things that are interesting to me. Those are the same questions I'm asking. Paul is talking about things that resonate with my organization. So looking at that in the new environment through my eyes, sales now more than ever is intertwined with marketing, and the ideas are very similar.
I have two things to run by you about that topic. From this salesperson or business development person perspective, I thought what you said was really powerful, because that conversation with the organization is starting online. It's starting with that marketing process that professionals like you and others, so expertly manage and invest a significant amount of money in. Am I right? I mean, do you?
Absolutely.
Marketing professionals know exactly how much every one of those leads that turns into appointments, how much was invested in that lead. And think about the expectations that prospect has once they've started down that buyer journey, that when they reach out to talk with a professional, are they going to get help to solve their problem?
Right.
And what if their expectations are not met? So very good point regarding what they see from a business development professional, a salesperson, when they look them up online, whether you see their LinkedIn profile, whether you see other, assets, videos, tools that they have online. So if you're in sales, definitely think about what that first impression of you is when someone looks you up online. Make sure it's in alignment with the marketing journey and with what your ideal client wants to see. But then if you look at it from a management perspective, from a sales leader or a business owner perspective, sales and marketing are like two concentric circles that have started to overlap a little more and more. But if you're looking at it from a return on investment standpoint, as businesses are paying more and more for qualified conversations, what should that close ratio be? And how is their sales team equipped to maximize that opportunity, fully flesh out the prospect's problems, how you can solve them, how you can help them better understand what they're dealing with so they can make the best decision to move forward.
That sounds like a whole great topic for another webinar, because I mean that is seriously, and you were touching on so many things that we get asked by our prospects all the time is, how do you start to look at that as a total value cycle and a lifetime value of a customer?
Yes.
What is your cost of acquisition, your customer acquisition cost, and how does that relate to doing things to, hack your funnel to get more growth and improve that ROI on what you're investing versus what you're returning? So yeah, and I think that coaching people on that in the new environment is very different as well, because the funnel operates differently, and the deal cycle just in general is very different. So with that said, we're getting pretty close to time here. Paul, do we have any questions that have come in, or is there anything left over here to touch on this Q&A?
Yeah, so I was just about to ask you. I think it's a good question here. So since we've been talking about sales transitioning to a more virtual environment, do we see face-to-face meetings in person making a return anytime soon, or is virtual closing going to continue to be the new normal?
That's a good one. That would be dangerous. Kristine, you want to go first?
Well, here's what I see working with a lot of different industries. It definitely varies by industry, but I think the litmus test or the bar for face-to-face is higher. But it also means the stakes are higher. So if you are traveling for a face-to-face meeting, the buyer is more engaged, but you need to be more engaged as well. So I think the question is that level of proficiency and the expectations for face-to-face are going to be higher. What do you think?
I cannot agree more. I think the expectations on face-to-face is higher. I think you're going to see expectations on what sort of ROI are we getting from attending events get much, much higher. And I think COVID really, the blessing in disguise is it challenged a lot of companies to really ask themselves, am I getting a good ROI out of spending $25,000 to go to that conference every year? Honestly, 90% of the time, the answer is probably no, or marginal. Maybe it's not no, but it's marginal. Mm-hmm. Now, there is value in seeing your clients. I will absolutely not dispute that.
Yes, there is.
Some of the best value I found, though, was not having a booth or go into all those little, 15-minute speed dating sessions, but getting your best clients and inviting them out to dinner while you're at that conference, or going to play golf while you're at that conference, or doing something to engage in a way that's not just going into a booth. But I think the expectations on that are much higher. And I think marketing teams are being challenged. Where are you getting the ROI return on that? And the same thing to salespeople, because now every meeting in person is going to be extremely, extremely important, and expectations are certainly going up. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's going to be a hybrid. I think we're going to see virtual events getting more prominent. I think it's going to be blended with real events. I think you're going to see in-person mixed with virtual. It's going to be a big melting pot. Who knows where we will be in 24 months?
Probably a lot more change.
Yeah, right. That is the one thing we can always count on.
I think you guys are both right. I think that I wasn't even considering that when those meetings do take place, those face-to-face and in-person meetings, they're important now, right? They're expecting a lot out of that, because something over the past year that's been happening is, oh, well, why do you need to come here? We can just meet virtually about it, right? And that's kind of one thing that sucks for somebody in sales, right? Like, I visited my customers in UK last year, and we had a great training session, a great kickoff session. It was awesome meeting them, hanging out, whatever. I miss that. I miss those face-to-face meetings. But you're right, now when those do take place, they're going to be a lot more important. There's a lot more emphasis on that. You're going to really have to come through and deliver. And it's not going to be just your typical thing that you can do over Zoom, right?
Right.
So I think a lot of people have realized that, and it sucks for some people in sales who were able to travel or go visit their customers, that you can almost just resolve your conversation with a Zoom meeting now. But we'll see. I'm not sure how this is going to play out.
It raises the cost of winging it.
Yes.
And the lesson is don't wing it. Don't leave it to chance, when you have that opportunity.
Yeah.
The cost of that is almost a hashtag in and of itself, Kristine. That cost of winging it. That is so good. And I agree, that's going to raise. And I think the donut run is going to die too, which it should have maybe even a decade ago. We'll probably see decline in market share of Krispy Kreme. But if you're a sales rep and all your value you're bringing is a box of donuts to drop off at somebody's desk or whatever, the new environment will not treat you very well.
Yes, I think you're exactly right.
So, Paul, any other questions we had left, or any last minute Q&A that we want to get into before we start to wrap up here?
No, I think I had some, but I think we answered them really around the lack of emotional and interpersonal we're seeing in sales now. I mean, that's one thing was taken away from the in-person conversations, sitting across the table from my customer, my prospect, seeing their reaction, seeing how they move when I say something, or just having that energy in the room. So I guess one of the questions I had was, how different is that with virtual selling now? Do you feel like that's almost been eradicated or hindered quite a bit because we don't have those meetings? But I think we talked about the skill of using video and being emotional and interpersonal and asking the right questions and connecting with your prospects and customers that way. So I think we did answer that, but I'm not sure if there was anything else on that topic.
Paul, Sandler has a lot more coming up on actually that topic, because there's ways you can engage your prospect on video. Whether you're using a whiteboard or whether you're using interactive tools like AHA Slides to gather feedback. It's a tool I use all the time. Love it. We have a webinar in conjunction with HubSpot about modernizing your sales approach and hybrid selling coming up, and goes over actually a lot of the details of how you can specifically do that in this hybrid world. How can you engage people when you're on a screen?
Perfect. Well, make sure I get the link to that, because I'm definitely going to want to tune into that, because I think that a lot of people struggle with that these days, especially when people like myself, I found myself very good in person. That was my strong suit, was get in person, have a good handshake, be very easy to talk to.
Yes.
And then there's probably people like me who found it difficult to turn on the video. And after a while it gets easier, but there's definitely A players out there who are good in person and not as good in video. And I think that it's all about practice, and there's no excuse really. Like when we go back to not using the phone or not using the video, there's no excuse to try and keep getting better, right?
And master a new skill.
100%. Yeah. So great. Well, I think that's all the questions on my end here, Dave, that we had.
Okay. Excellent. Well, yeah. And so we're right close to the hour here, so we'll go ahead and start to wrap up. But Paul, you mentioned links as well. And Kristine, by the way, I'd love to join that. So I'd certainly love to get that link.
I'll shoot it to you.
For everyone that has stayed and listened with us, thank you so much. We're actually going to send out a summary email to you. It's going to include a couple of things. It's going to include a on-demand link to this video. So if you want to go back and reference any of these topics, or if you want to share it with somebody else in your organization, we're going to send the on-demand version of this webinar. We're going to include some links to LinkedIn, Kristine's LinkedIn profile, to some of the Sandler sales training resources. We'll also include that link that Kristine mentioned for the upcoming training with HubSpot. So if you want to check that out, you can. And then we also have some blogs and some other resources from our organization, Klyck.io, that we can share in there as well. So check out the email. All your on-demand resources will be there as well on the landing page. If there's anything that anyone wants to continue to talk about, you can reach out to Kristine directly. You can reach out to us. We always love to engage anyone that wants to talk about sales or sales training. It's something we're passionate about. So thank you all for joining. Kristine, incredible conversation. I always love having you on our show and on our webinars.
I appreciate you having me.
So thank you so much for joining. And Paul, a great addition to the conversation as always, man. I love hearing those tactical examples of what's happening in the field. So thank you for sharing all those. Thanks for having me. Thanks, Kristine. This was a really good conversation. I think there's already some good takeaways and reminders for me and my team here. So
awesome.
Awesome. Absolutely. Well, again, everyone, thank you for joining. We'll be sending out the review email soon, and we hope to see you back for one of our other webinars in the future. So thanks, Kristine. Have a great day.
Thanks.